Another factor that's affecting the food prospect in countries in Asia is what I call the Japan syndrome. When countries are densely populated before they seriously industrialize, they lose a lot of cropland in the industrialization process. And that loss of cropland leads to an absolute decline in grain production. For example, if we look at Japan historically, we see that after 1950, grain production was increasing slowly, and then as the growth in the economy gained momentum, grain production climbed rapidly before eventually starting to level off as population slowed and stabilized. But while consumption was going like this, production started to rise and rose for maybe a decade, and somewhere around 1960 began to turn downward. And the reason it began to turn downward was because with factory construction, with building roads and highways and parking lots for automobiles, the loss of cropland was sufficient to actually reduce the overall grain harvest. The other thing that was happening was that at one time, Japan had a very high degree of double cropping. But in order to double crop in the temperate zone, you have, when the first crop is mature, you have to harvest it very quickly and get the second crop planted in order for it to mature during the growing season. But as industrialization accelerates, more and more labor is pulled out of the countryside, and until there's not enough labor to make this quick transition. And so multiple cropping also declines, and the result is that Japan went from being maybe importing, say, 15% of its grain in 1960 to by 1980 importing 70% of its grain. That same set of forces was at work in South Korea and in Taiwan, and the result is that both of those countries now also import over 70% of their total grain supply. I call this the Japan syndrome because it was in Japan that I first recognized this pattern. But what we're now looking at is a number of other densely populated countries in Asia that are beginning to have exactly the same experience. China is one, but other countries that could be affected, obviously, over time as industrialization accelerates are India, Indonesia, just to mention two other rather populous countries.